I never thought I would return to that house, the place where I was once called the burden they graciously forgave. The cream-colored envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much it would hurt. Daniel's handwriting hadn't changed in the 14 years since our divorce. Still that careful, controlled script that had once written love letters and later signed custody papers that stripped away everything I thought I knew about family. The wedding invitation was elegant, expensive. The kind that announced not just a celebration, but a statement of arrival. At the bottom, in Daniel's familiar hand, "Hope you can celebrate my new beginning." My new beginning. As if the 17 years I had spent raising Callie, his stepdaughter, my sister's biological child, had been some kind of intermission in his real life. I should explain about Callie, though the explanation itself is a wound that never quite heals. When my sister Eva died in that car accident 14 years ago, Callie was 3 years old. Eva had been young, brilliant, and desperately in love with a man who couldn't handle the responsibility of a child. That man was Daniel, though I didn't know it then. I only knew that my sister needed help, and that a little girl needed a mother. I had been working 2 jobs to put myself through nursing school, living in a studio apartment with furniture bought from thrift stores. Taking in Callie meant giving up my dreams, at least temporarily. It meant night shifts at the hospital while she slept, grocery shopping with coupons, and wearing the same 3 dresses in rotation because children's clothes and school supplies came first. But I had loved Eva fiercely, and I loved Callie even more. When Daniel came into our lives 2 years later, charming, stable, offering marriage and the promise of the family life I had been struggling to provide alone, it seemed like a miracle. I was so grateful. That gratitude, I realize now, was my first mistake. "Mom, you're gripping that invitation like it owes you money," Callie said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with that uncanny ability teenagers have to materialize exactly when you're having a breakdown. At 17, Callie had inherited Eva's sharp wit and startling beauty, but she had developed something my sister never possessed, a quiet strength that came from watching me navigate the world as a single mother. She had seen me work double shifts to pay for her dance lessons, had watched me smile through parent-teacher conferences where other mothers whispered about the divorced one, had witnessed me rebuild our life from nothing after Daniel left. "Just reading," I said, setting the invitation on the counter like it might bite me. Callie picked it up, scanning the elegant script. Her expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that appeared whenever Daniel's name came up. "Are we going?" she asked. "Absolutely not. Maybe we should." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. At 17, she was already taller than me, with a poise that made adults take notice. She had been accepted to 3 universities, all offering partial scholarships. She spoke 2 languages, volunteered at the animal shelter, and had never once asked me why her father had walked away without a backward glance. "Why would we put ourselves through that, sweetheart?" Callie was quiet for a long moment, studying the invitation. When she looked up, there was something in her eyes I hadn't seen before. A kind of quiet determination that reminded me achingly of Eva. "Maybe it's time they saw what you chose to be silent about all these years," she said softly. Little did I know that my daughter had been carrying secrets of her own. Have you ever received an invitation that felt more like a test than a celebration? Isobel's story is just beginning, and the choices she and Callie are about to make will challenge everything this family believes about strength, sacrifice, and the true meaning of dignity. Continue reading to discover what happens when 17 years of silence finally finds its voice, and why sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who have been quietly enduring. What would you do in Isobel's position? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story resonates with your own experiences of quiet strength, pass it along to someone who needs to hear it. For 3 days, The invitation sat on my kitchen counter like an accusation. I would walk past it on my way to work, glimpse it while making dinner, and feel that familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. Daniel's family had never accepted me. I had been the emergency replacement for Eva, the sister who stepped in when tragedy struck. To them, I was the nurse who had trapped their successful son with another woman's child and middle-class expectations. When Daniel left, citing irreconcilable differences and a need to find himself, they had barely bothered to hide their relief. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Daniel kept the house, the cars, the social circle. I kept Callie and a medical debt from Eva's accident that would take me 8 years to pay off. The custody arrangement was generous in name only. Daniel saw Callie twice a month for exactly 2 hours, usually at restaurants where he could check his phone between conversations about her grades. When those visits stopped entirely 3 years ago, Callie had shrugged and said, "His loss." But I had seen her checking the window on Sunday afternoons for months afterward. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told Callie on Friday morning as she ate breakfast before school. "About the wedding? About staying silent." I poured myself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. "You're right. I have been silent. About a lot of things." Callie set down her spoon. "What kinds of things?" This was the conversation I had been dreading for 14 years. How do you tell a child that the man she called Dad had wanted her mother to terminate the pregnancy? How do you explain that his family had paid for Eva to disappear for several months, hoping the problem would resolve itself? How do you admit that you had known all of this and married him anyway, because you thought love could overcome the ugly truth of how people treat inconvenient women? Things that happened before you were old enough to understand. Things about your biological mother. About Aunt Eva. Callie's voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the hunger for information in her eyes. I had always told her stories about Eva, her laugh, her talent for painting, her dreams of traveling the world. But I had been careful to keep the stories light, unburdened by the complexity of adult choices and consequences. Yes, and about Daniel, about why he really left. Callie was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Will you tell me if we go to the wedding?" "I'll tell you regardless. You're old enough now. But if we go, you'll show them." I studied my daughter's face. At what point had she become the brave one? When had she learned to see through the careful narratives adults construct to protect children from ugly truths? Callie, going to that wedding would be walking into a room full of people who have spent years believing that Daniel's life improved when I left it. His new wife, his family, their friends, they all eyes see me as the first wife who couldn't hold on to a good man. "And what do you see yourself as?" The question caught me off guard. In 17 years of single motherhood, no one had ever asked me that. "Tired," I said honestly. "Really, really tired." Callie reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were long and elegant, like Eva's had been. "Mom, you raised me alone. You worked 2 jobs to keep me in dance classes. You drove 3 hours every weekend when I made varsity soccer so I wouldn't have to quit. You've never missed a parent-teacher conference, never forgotten a birthday, never made me feel like I was anything other than wanted." I felt tears prick at my eyes. Daniel left because he couldn't handle being responsible for someone else's choices. But you stayed. You chose me every single day for 14 years. Maybe it's time someone acknowledged that. That afternoon, I bought a dress for the wedding. Nothing fancy. I couldn't afford fancy, but something that fit well and made me feel like the woman I had fought to become rather than the girl I had been when Daniel left. As I hung it in my closet, I thought about what Callie had said, about showing them, about staying silent. I had no idea that my daughter had been preparing for this moment her entire life. The wedding was held at the Riverside Country Club, the same venue where Daniel and I had celebrated our 5th wedding anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me as I pulled into the circular drive, my 10-year-old Honda looking shabby among the BMWs and Mercedes. You okay? Callie asked from the passenger seat. She looked stunning in a navy dress we had found on sale, her dark hair pulled back in a style that made her look older than 17. Ask me in 3 hours, I said, checking my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror. I had spent an hour on my makeup that morning, trying to hide the exhaustion that came from working night shifts to pay for Callie's college application fees. Walking into the country club felt like stepping back in time. The same crystal chandeliers, the same marble floors, the same sense that I didn't quite belong. I had always felt like an imposter in these settings, the nurse who had married above her station. The first person I recognized was Daniel's mother, Margaret, holding court near the bar in a silver dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Our eyes met across the room, and her expression shifted from surprise to something that might have been disdain. Isobel. She glided over with the predatory grace of a woman who had spent 60 years perfecting the art of social warfare. How unexpected. Mrs. Patterson. I managed to smile. Congratulations on Daniel's marriage. Yes, well, Sabrina is everything we hoped Daniel would find. Young, accomplished, from a good family. Each word was carefully chosen, a reminder of everything I had not been. And this must be Callie. How you've grown. Callie smiled politely, but I caught the flash of something sharp in her eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. You look exactly the same. I had to suppress a smile. At 17, Callie was already better at this game than I would ever be. We should find our seats, I said, eager to escape before Margaret could deliver more backhanded compliments. But as we moved through the crowd, I became aware of the whispers following us. The subtle shift in conversations as people noticed my presence. The once-over glances that cataloged my off-the-rack dress, my discount shoes, my careful but obviously home-done hair. Is that Isobel? I heard someone say behind me. I can't believe she came. Poor thing, she must be so embarrassed. Callie's hand found mine and squeezed. When I looked at her, she was scanning the room with an expression I had never seen before, calculating, almost predatory. Mom, she said quietly, there's something I need to tell you before this goes any further. But before she could continue, the music started, and we were swept along with the crowd toward the ceremony space. As we found seats in the back row, the only ones left, I caught my first glimpse of Daniel in 4 years. He looked good, successful, happy. The kind of happiness that comes from leaving your problems behind and starting fresh with someone who has never seen you fail. And then I saw his bride. Sabrina was everything Margaret had implied. Young, beautiful, polished in the way that only comes from a lifetime of privilege. As she walked down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than I made in 6 months, I felt the familiar ache of inadequacy that had haunted my marriage to Daniel. But as I watched them exchange vows, promising to love and cherish each other through whatever challenges life might bring, I felt something else. Something that surprised me with its intensity. Relief. I was no longer responsible for Daniel's happiness, no longer the woman who had to smile and pretend that his emotional distance was just stress from work. No longer the wife who had to apologize for not being enough, not understanding enough, not supporting his dreams enough. For the first time in years, I felt free, until Sabrina's maid of honor stood up to give her speech, and I realized that some prisons have longer sentences than others. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sabrina's best friend and maid of honor, Jessica, and I have to say, this wedding is like something out of a fairy tale. A beautiful princess finds her prince and gets her happily ever after. The reception had begun with the usual toasts, funny stories about the groom's college days, emotional words from proud parents, wishes for a lifetime of happiness. I had been starting to relax, thinking we might make it through the evening without incident. Then Jessica turned toward our table. But you know, every good fairy tale needs to acknowledge the past before celebrating the future. Some of you may have noticed that Daniel's previous wife decided to join us tonight. A hush fell over the room. I felt every eye turn toward me, and my stomach dropped. "Isobel, would you stand up? Don't be shy." I remained seated, heat flooding my face. Beside me, Callie had gone very still. Jessica's smile never wavered. "Oh, come on. We're all friends here. I think it's so brave of you to come tonight. Really, it shows such character to celebrate your ex-husband's upgrade." A few nervous laughs rippled through the crowd. Someone behind me whispered, "This is awful," but Jessica wasn't finished. I mean, it takes a special kind of woman to watch her former husband marry someone younger, more successful, well, let's just say Sabrina brings a lot to the table that Daniel never had before. I felt Callie's hand grip mine so tightly it hurt. "And I have to admire your dedication, Isobel. Raising Daniel's stepdaughter all these years, even after he realized that playing daddy to someone else's child wasn't really his calling. That's true commitment." The silence in the room was deafening now. I could feel the weight of 300 people watching me, waiting to see how I would respond to this public evisceration. But Jessica saved her cruelest cut for last. "Of course, I suppose when you're a single mother working night shifts at the hospital, you don't have many opportunities to meet successful men. So really, tonight must be bittersweet for you, seeing what Daniel's life looks like when he's with someone who can actually match his ambitions." She raised her champagne glass with a brilliant smile. "So here's to new beginnings, second chances, and leaving the past where it belongs." The room erupted in uncomfortable applause. I sat frozen, humiliated beyond anything I had experienced in my adult life. This wasn't just an insult. It was a public execution, orchestrated with surgical precision. I felt Callie start to rise beside me, and I grabbed her arm. "Don't," I whispered. "Let's just go." But my daughter looked down at me with eyes that held no trace of the teenager I thought I knew. "No, Mom," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent room. "I think it's time someone told the truth." She stood up, and suddenly she seemed older than 17. She seemed dangerous. "If nobody else is going to say anything," Callie announced, her voice steady and strong, "then I will." The entire reception hall fell silent as Callie stood beside our table. In that moment, she looked so much like Eva that my breath caught in my throat. The same proud posture, the same fierce intelligence in her eyes, the same refusal to back down when confronted with injustice. "Callie, sweetheart," I whispered, tugging at her dress. "Please, let's just leave." She looked down at me with an expression I had never seen before. Protective, determined, and heartbreakingly adult. "Mom, you've spent my entire life protecting everyone else's feelings. Daniel's feelings when he couldn't handle being a father. His family's feelings when they made it clear I wasn't really welcome. Even my biological mother's memory, because you thought the truth would hurt me more than the lies." She reached into her small purse, the vintage clutch that had belonged to Eva, and pulled out something that made my blood run cold. A small leather-bound journal, purple leather, with Eva's initials embossed in gold. "Callie, where did you—" "I found it in your dresser drawer when I was looking for birth certificate papers for college applications," she said quietly. "You kept it all these years, every page, every truth you thought you were protecting me from." I felt the walls of my carefully constructed world begin to crumble. That journal contained everything: Eva's fears about her pregnancy, her relationship with Daniel, the pressure from his family, the money they had offered her to handle the situation quietly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Callie announced, turning to address the room with the confidence of someone who had inherited her mother's courage and my stubborn determination, "I think you deserve to hear the real story about my family." Daniel half rose from the head table. "Callie, this isn't the time." "When is the time, Daniel?" she asked, using his first name with a casual disrespect that made him flinch. "When would be a good time to talk about how you pressured my mother to terminate her pregnancy? When would be appropriate to mention that your family paid her to disappear for 6 months, hoping the problem would resolve itself?" Gasps echoed through the room. Margaret Patterson had gone white as her pearls. "That's enough," Daniel said, his voice sharp with authority. "You're a child. You don't understand." "I understand that my mother died in a car accident when I was 3 years old," Callie said, her voice rising. "I understand that this woman," she gestured toward me, "took me in without hesitation, even though it meant giving up her nursing degree, her savings, and any chance at the life she had planned." Tears were streaming down my face now, but Callie wasn't finished. "I understand that you married her because you felt guilty, and divorced her because guilt isn't the same as love. I understand that your family convinced you that walking away from us was somehow noble because we were holding you back." She opened Eva's journal, her hands perfectly steady. "But what I think this room needs to understand is what kind of woman my mother, my real mother, the one who raised me, actually is." Callie's voice rang clear across the silent reception hall as she began to read from Eva's journal. "Isobel told me I could go to art school in Paris. She said she would keep the baby, raise her as her own, give her everything I couldn't. When I told her I wasn't sure I could give up my daughter, she said something I'll never forget. 'If you can't choose, I'll choose for you. And I choose love.'" I closed my eyes, remembering that conversation 17 years ago. Eva had been so young, so scared, so torn between the life she wanted and the life she had created. "My sister doesn't know that Daniel came to see me yesterday," Callie continued reading. "He offered me money, his family's money, to take care of the situation. When I told him Isobel had already offered to adopt the baby, he laughed. He said Isobel was just being dramatic, that she'd change her mind once she realized what she was getting into." The color had drained from Daniel's face. Sabrina was staring at her new husband with an expression of growing horror. "He doesn't understand that Isobel has never changed her mind about anything important in her life. When our parents died, she was 19 and could have put me in foster care. She became my guardian instead. When I got pregnant, she could have lectured me. She offered to become a grandmother instead. Daniel thinks my sister is weak because she's kind. He doesn't understand that kindness is the strongest choice of all." Callie looked up from the journal, her eyes finding Daniel across the room. "This entry is dated 2 weeks before my mother died. 2 weeks before the car accident that changed everything. But here's the part that really matters. The part that explains everything about the woman who raised me." She turned to a different page, one marked with a faded pink ribbon. "Isobel married Daniel today. I watched her promise to love and honor a man who wanted her to send me away, who saw my daughter as a burden instead of a gift. She did it because she thought it would give Callie a father, and me a chance at the life I wanted. She sacrificed her own happiness because she thought it was what we needed." The room was dead silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. "I tried to tell her that Daniel would never love her the way she deserves to be loved, because he can't forgive her for being better than him, but Isobel sees the good in everyone, even when they can't see it in themselves, especially then." Callie closed the journal and looked directly at Jessica, who had started this public humiliation. "You want to talk about what kind of woman my mother is? She's the kind of woman who worked 2 jobs for 8 years to pay off medical debt that wasn't even hers. She's the kind of woman who drove me to every soccer game, every dance recital, every school event, and never once made me feel like I was anything other than the center of her world." She turned to address the entire room now, her voice carrying with the authority of absolute truth. "She's the kind of woman who stayed silent about the real reason her marriage ended, because she thought protecting a man's reputation was more important than defending herself. She's the kind of woman who let you all believe she wasn't good enough for Daniel, when the truth is that Daniel was never good enough for her." The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then Margaret Patterson began to cry. Not the delicate tears of a society matron, but the broken sobs of a woman who had just confronted the ugliness of her own choices. "Isobel," she whispered across the room. "Oh, my dear girl, what have we done?" But Callie wasn't finished. "There's one more thing this room needs to know," she said, reaching into her purse again. Something I learned just this week when I was filling out my college scholarship applications. She pulled out an official-looking document. Mom, remember when you told me you gave up your nursing degree to raise me? You lied. I stared at my daughter in shock. Callie, what are you talking about? She held up the document, my nursing license, current and valid. You finished your degree. You went to night school for 3 years while I was little, doing your clinicals during my nap times and studying after I went to bed. You graduated summa cum laude from one of the best nursing programs in the state. My heart stopped. How did you? I called the school when I couldn't find your diploma. They told me you not only graduated, but that you were offered a position in their pediatric cardiac unit. A position you turned down because the hours would have conflicted with my school schedule. She turned back to the room, her voice growing stronger. My mother isn't just a night shift nurse working at the local hospital. She's a specialized pediatric cardiac nurse who has chosen to work nights and weekends for 14 years so she could be available during the day for school events, soccer games, and homework help. I felt the room's energy shift as people began to understand the magnitude of what Callie was revealing. Last month, she was offered the position of head nurse in the pediatric cardiac unit at Children's Hospital. It would have doubled her salary and given her the recognition she's always deserved. But the position required some evening hours, and she turned it down because she didn't want to miss my senior year events. I was crying openly now, not from humiliation, but from pure amazement at this child I had raised. When had she become so observant? When had she learned to see through my carefully constructed narratives? So when you talk about my mother not being good enough, not successful enough, not ambitious enough, you're talking about a woman who has quietly sacrificed every opportunity for advancement because she put my needs first, every single time. Daniel stood up from the head table, his face ashen. Callie, Isobel, I didn't know. You didn't know because you never asked, Callie said simply. You saw what you wanted to see, a struggling single mother who wasn't living up to your standards. You never saw a woman who turned down a 6-figure salary 3 times because she refused to compromise on being present for the child she chose to love. She looked at Sabrina, who had been sitting in stunned silence. Congratulations on your marriage. I hope you realize what kind of man you've chosen, one who will leave when life gets complicated and will convince himself it's your fault for not being strong enough to handle it alone. Then she did something that took my breath away. She walked over to Daniel and held out her hand. I want to thank you, she said, as he automatically shook it, for leaving, because if you had stayed, I might never have learned what real strength looks like. I might never have had a mother who showed me that love is a choice you make every single day, not just when it's convenient. She turned back to me, and in her eyes I saw not my little girl, but a young woman who had inherited the best of both her mothers, Eva's courage and my stubborn refusal to abandon the people I loved. Mom, I need you to stop protecting everyone else and start protecting yourself. Accept the position at Children's Hospital. Let me take out student loans for college like a normal person. Start living the life you've earned instead of the life you think you deserve. She walked back to our table and took my hand. And next time someone questions your worth, remember this room. Remember 300 people learning that kindness is not weakness, that sacrifice is not failure, and that the woman who stays is often stronger than the man who leaves. The applause started slowly, just one person, then another, until the entire room was on their feet. But I only had eyes for my daughter, this remarkable young woman who had just rewritten my story with the truth I had been too afraid to tell. As the applause died down, I stood up and faced the room that had just witnessed my public redemption. For the first time in 17 years, I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. Thank you, I said simply, for finally listening. I turned to Margaret Patterson, who was still crying at her table. Mrs. Patterson, I forgive you. I forgive all of you. Not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger was poisoning the life I've built with my daughter. I looked at Daniel one last time. I loved you. I covered for you. I let you and your family rewrite history to make my kindness look like weakness and your abandonment look like wisdom. But that ends today. Callie and I walked toward the exit together, and I felt lighter with every step. Behind us, I could hear whispered conversations, the sound of people reassessing everything they thought they knew about my story. "Mom," Callie said as we reached the door, "there's something else I need to tell you." I looked at her, wondering what other surprises this remarkable young woman had in store. "I already accepted the full scholarship to Northwestern. I'll be studying pre-med. I want to be a pediatric cardiac surgeon." I stopped walking. "Callie, that scholarship requires you to maintain a 3.8 GPA. The workload is intense. I know, but I've had an excellent example of what it looks like to work hard for something that matters." She smiled at me, the same smile Eva used to give me when she was planning something wonderful and slightly dangerous. Besides, someone needs to carry on the family tradition of being underestimated. 6 months later, I accepted the position as head of pediatric cardiac nursing at Children's Hospital. Callie was right. I had been protecting everyone's feelings except my own for far too long. A year after that, the video of Callie's speech went viral on social media. Someone at the wedding had recorded it, and it became a rallying cry for single mothers everywhere who had been made to feel like their sacrifices were somehow failures. I never heard from Daniel again, though I heard through mutual acquaintances that his marriage to Sabrina lasted exactly 18 months. Apparently, she left him for someone who appreciated strong women instead of feeling threatened by them. Margaret Patterson sent me a letter on Callie's 18th birthday. In it, she admitted that she had known the truth about Eva's pregnancy, about the pressure Daniel's family had put on her, about the choice I had made to protect everyone's secrets at the expense of my own reputation. She asked for forgiveness and offered to pay for Callie's college expenses. I sent the letter back with a note. "Callie has everything she needs, but thank you for finally telling the truth." Today, Callie is in her second year of pre-med, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while volunteering at the Children's Hospital where I work. She wants to specialize in pediatric cardiac surgery, and I have no doubt she'll achieve that goal. After all, she comes from a long line of women who know how to fight for what matters. Sometimes people ask me if I regret staying silent for so long, if I wish I had defended myself earlier, if I'm angry about the years I spent letting other people define my worth. The truth is simpler than that. I spent 17 years teaching my daughter that love is a choice you make every day, that strength comes from lifting others up, and that the most powerful response to cruelty is often grace. She learned those lessons so well that when the time came, she was strong enough to speak the truth I had been too tired to tell. That's not a failure, that's a victory. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to become the person others tried to make you believe you were. Sometimes, surviving with your dignity intact is the loudest form of justice there is. Tag someone who needs to hear this. Have you ever been the silent one in the room? Sometimes the woman who stays quiet is gathering strength, not giving up. Share this story if you believe that kindness is courage, and that the people who underestimate you often end up learning the most about what real strength looks like.